Well, last week we opened the 5th chapter of the Gospel of John. If you've got your Bibles, you can turn there. And we looked at the story found in this chapter of a man who had been laying by this famous natural pool, the Pool of Bethesda, for about 38 years. That's what it's inferred. He's been there a long time. And his legs had been atrophied. Think about this, for 30 years. It never worked. He never walked. And then Jesus shows up, heals the man. His legs are somehow immediately restored. Strength is there. Maybe they fill out. Muscle tissue just appears. I mean, what do your legs look like if you haven't used them for that many years? Toothpicks. And now all of a sudden he's got the strength to stand. And that was a fulfillment, by the way, of one of the prophecies concerning what things would be like when the Messiah shows up on earth. This was from Isaiah chapter 35, where maybe this is familiar, where it says, the lame would leap like a deer. That the Messiah would have the kind of healing to help people that can't walk. He did. And I want to share with you that the way that Jesus healed this man actually addresses some Christian churches and denominations that teach that you're only healed by your faith. And if you don't have the faith that you can be healed, then you're not going to get healed. Because the healing here happened totally without faith on the part of the man. Remember, Jesus asked him a yes or no question, and the man responded with an excuse. He didn't say to Jesus, I believe, Jesus, that you can heal me. And Jesus didn't say to him, by your faith, you are made well. This healing was just grace alone. Think about it. Well, verse 9 is where we pick up in chapter 5. Again, it says, at once, this is when Jesus tells the man, get up, stand up, take your mat. Walk away, go home. And once the man was made well, and at once the man was made well, and he took up his mat, picked it up, and he began to walk. This is important right here. Now that day, John says, was a Sabbath. So the Jews, and that means the Pharisees, the religious leaders, the Jews said to the man who had been cured, it's the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your mat. But he answered them, the man who made me well said to me, take up your mat and walk. They asked him, who's the man who said to you, take up your mat and walk? Now the man who had been healed didn't know who it was, for Jesus had disappeared in the crowd that was there. The Sabbath, that was a big issue in the conflicts between Jesus and the Pharisees. Because in the 4th commandment of the 10 commandments of God, in the 4th commandment, God says you got 6 days in the week to do your work, and on the 7th day, rest. Do nothing. So the Sabbath to the Jews begins Friday at sunset, ends Saturday at sunset, and come Sunday morning, really, you can get back to work. But years after Moses received that law from God, the Jewish authorities began to create additional laws, and then more, and more, and more. And they made some very specific ones to make sure that no one broke the 4th commandment. But those laws were so complicated that they were impossible to follow, because they were legalistic. Perhaps you've heard of one of the Pharisees that actually stated that if a parent was carrying a child who was carrying a pebble in his or her little pocket, that would be carrying a burden which would be breaking the Sabbath and punishable by law. So they take a command of God found in Jeremiah 17 that says not to carry a burden or literally a weight on the Sabbath, and they expounded on it. They forbid wearing one's artificial teeth, which actually they had in that day, believe it or not. or one's wooden leg that they had in that day, because that would be carrying a burden. You know, legalism notices every single infraction. That's what legalism do. It does. Legalism points out. Legalists point out every single little infraction. The actual command that God gave to Jeremiah is found in chapter 17, verse 22, and it reads this: "Do not carry a burden out of your house on the Sabbath, or do any work, but keep the Sabbath day holy, as I commanded your ancestors." The actual words of the religious leaders, and their new and improved version, was this: "If anyone carries anything from a public place to a private house on the Sabbath intentionally, he is punishable by death, by stoning." In other words, God said that you can't do this or that, and if you do, we'll have to kill you. Oh my gosh. So this man, after 38 years of lying by this pool, he gets healed by Jesus only to be killed by the Pharisees. So the leaders are putting words in God's mouth. You know, and I was preparing for this, my thoughts turn to kids, my own kids, and all kids, because I know if you've been a parent, you've had this experience. Yeah, I remember one of my kids coming to me and telling me about something one of my other kids was doing that they shouldn't be doing. And without thinking, I said something like this: you know, tell him or her, you know, Dad says to stop what you're doing. Now, what follows is often not what I intended in the carrying out of my instructions. Because in the mind of the tattler, I have just conferred upon them the delightful privilege of momentarily speaking to their sibling as Dad's ambassador. And in a few moments, from another part of the house, I faintly hear a voice that goes something like this: "Dad says you have to stop right now, and you can't spend the night at so-and-so's house, and you have to give me that, and it's now mine forever." And does that sound familiar? I mean, the Sabbath was supposed to be a day of rest, of worship, of joy, not a day of burdens. That was God's point. But in an attempt to make the Sabbath burden-free, the laws of these religious leaders were in themselves burdens heavier than any physical burden ever could be. And you can imagine how careful you had to be every second of the Sabbath day, that you weren't breaking the law somehow. I mean, I want you to think about it. How do you not carry something? How do you not pick up something on a Sabbath at one point or another? And if you're outside, don't you carry stuff with you? A purse? A wallet? You're literally supposed to have nothing on you that you're carrying, no weight. This is nuts. So if you worry all day that you might not be relaxing, then be sure you're not relaxing. And the very day that you were supposed to look forward to all week, you instead, by sunset, you can't wait until the next day to get back to work. So it's no wonder that when Jesus came on the scene, he said, according to Mark chapter 2, verse 27, that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And I was thinking that this man who was laying by the pool, he knew the law. But did he remember this specific law at the moment? I mean, for the last 38 years, he didn't have to worry about breaking that law, given his condition. And for the first time in 38 years, he's walking under his own power. I wonder if he remembered that law when the authorities stopped him. I mean, we can be sure that he wasn't the only person. I'm sorry, he was the only person. He was the only person in the entire city who was carrying anything in his arms. Think about that. He would have stood out like a sore thumb. Nobody, by law, was carrying, dragging, holding anything. Cell phone, nothing. And here's this man with a mattress. Now this guy was by this pool for 38 years, and the leaders who caught him red-handed, I'm just thinking they didn't know him. If they did, then they were really cold-hearted, not to celebrate with the man, but only to accuse him of breaking their law. So the man tries to evade responsibility by saying, that he was just following orders from the man who made him well. So his defense was that somebody else told him to do it. And we need to recognize that Jesus didn't heal some guy who'd been lying by the pool just for a few days. Think about this. Otherwise, Jesus could have been accused of setting up some fraudulent miracle to attract followers. But Jesus picks a man that a lot of people have known can't walk. This guy, we've known him his whole life. He's never walked. So who could argue with the reality of his healing? Verse 12, look at that again. They asked him, the religious leaders, who's the man who said to you, pick up your mat and walk? I want you to notice they are cold-hearted enough to inquire more about the part that the man said about being made well. They ignore that, and they just ask him about the identity of the man who told him to break their law. Verse 13, now the man who had been healed didn't know who it was, for Jesus had disappeared into the crowd that was there. So this man who just got healed by Jesus didn't even know Jesus' name. You know what that tells you about Jesus? He's humble. This guy out of nowhere just asked you a question, one of you made well, I don't have anybody to carry me to the water when it bubbles. He goes, stand up. Pick up your mat and walk. So Jesus cares more about seeing the man healed than about being recognized for the miracle. He doesn't heal him and says, I am Jesus. Follow me. He didn't even say that. So this verse infers that a crowd gathered as the man was healed, and Jesus simply slipped away into the crowd. Now, maybe he pretended to be a spectator for a moment. You know, once he's in the crowd. Hey, what happened here? You know, this must be God. You know, wow, this is amazing. Who did this? Verse 14. Later, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, see, you have been made well. Do not sin anymore so that nothing worse happens to you. There's several interesting things found in this verse. First, the man went to church. Was he there to thank God? I'm sure. If so, he went to the right place, he did the right thing. And this man, being in church, tells us that the Jewish leaders had let him go after they first grilled him. And perhaps a crowd was with the man when, the leaders stopped him and they backed up the man's story of being healed, and that the man who healed him did in fact tell him to pick up his bed and go home. Now, I'm surprised they didn't arrest this man anyway, but in this verse it also says, Jesus found the man in the temple, which means Jesus went looking for him. Why? To tell him something that he needed to know. And what Jesus said could be a bit confusing. He said, see, you've been made well. Do not sin anymore so that nothing worse happens to you. Now, what does that lead you to think? The man's condition was the result of a sin he committed? Perhaps. But it also, as you read it in the original language, it can infer this, that the illness wasn't caused by any specific sin. But Jesus was telling the man that in his new life, in his new freedom, that the man wouldn't just go off the deep end. Like a person who gets out of jail only to misuse their new freedom and they end up with a life sentence. It's like Jesus is saying, there's a lot of things you haven't been able to do in your life. And now, the possibilities are endless. Don't blow it. Don't use your new freedom for something reckless. Now, the man, he didn't appear to respond with gratitude to Jesus at any time in this. I'm sure he was grateful, but it says that he then went directly to the Jewish leaders. Verse 15, the man went away after Jesus had met him in the temple, and he told the Jews that it was Jesus. He gives them Jesus' name. It was Jesus who made me well. Therefore, the Jews started persecuting Jesus because he was doing such things on the Sabbath. So once the man found Jesus' name, he goes to the Jewish leaders, he rats him out. Why? To let himself off the hook? I don't know, did the leaders bargain with the man? Did they say, we'll let you go if you find out the name of the man who healed you and give it to us. Did they offer the man money like they later do to Judas? Was he getting back at Jesus for setting them up to get busted? You know, thanks for healing me, Jesus, but you almost got me killed. I mean, you sure hope that that wasn't what he was doing. But then again, Judas was treacherous after all that Jesus did for him. But it says that they started persecuting Jesus because he was what? Doing such things on the Sabbath. Did you get that? All of the hatred of the Jewish leaders, that started right here. The hatred that they had for Jesus started here. John, the writer of this gospel, says that Jesus was doing such things on the Sabbath. Take that to mean that this man who was healed wasn't the only guy who was healed, not the only person that a miracle was performed for through Jesus. It was Jesus' MO to heal people on the Sabbath. Why? Jesus does stuff on purpose. Why the Sabbath? I think there's 3 reasons why. And the first is because Jesus knew it would draw attention to him. Meaning, after healing this man and telling the man to carry a burden in direct defiance to the specific law of the Jewish leaders, that was certainly going to draw attention to Jesus from the leaders. Because Jesus needs to arrange for an eventual showdown between them and him. Because they've got to be mad at him enough for something to hang him on a cross, so he dies in our place. Second, it was to begin to set people free. Jesus used it as a wedge to begin to separate the people from their religious leaders, as this particular law revealed just how in bondage the people were to the religion of their leaders. And at the foundation of their laws was the belief that God will accept us on how perfectly we keep his laws. But Jesus' miracles, listen, do you agree with this? They're one of the ways, one of the most profound, obvious, clear ways that Jesus was teaching people that God's love and care and God's desire to work in their lives had nothing to do with how well they did the list. It had everything to do with God's love and grace. Unconditional love. I'm sorry, do you remember how many miracles Jesus did? Remember the very close, like the last verse of John's Gospel says, you know, talking about everything he just wrote, he goes, Jesus did all these and so many other things that if they were all to be written down in books, the world itself, the surface of the world, wouldn't be a big enough library to contain them all. Jesus was busy all the time. Miracle, miracle, healing, healing, miracle, miracle. Was he healing a bunch of righteous people who were doing the list great? Who were not breaking God's laws? No. The miracles is to show you the unconditional love of God. The goodness of God. Not to run away from God. Come to God. He's the guy who can fix stuff. And that's why so often Jesus' miracles, he connected them to the power that he had to forgive sin. The authority that he had to forgive sin. Like the paralytic. Remember that story? The man being led down through the roof by his 4 friends. You know that one. That's profound. They bring him to Jesus thinking he's going to heal this guy like he's healed everybody else. And Jesus looks at the man, and the first thing Jesus says is, your sins are forgiven. You know, his friends are going, that's not what we want you to tell him. What do you mean sins are forgiven? He can't sin, he can't even walk. No, he can sin. Even though he's paralyzed, there's sins he can commit. Here. What he says, what he thinks. Jesus says, your sins are forgiven. And then it says he knew the minds. He was reading the minds. He knew the thoughts of the Jewish leaders around him. Who is this guy claiming to have the authority to forgive sins? Only God has the authority to forgive sins. Well, Jesus knew their thoughts. That they knew that only God had the authority to forgive sins. And then Jesus says, so that you may know that the Son has authority to forgive sins. And then he looks at the man. Stand up, take your bed, go home. Just like the man at the Pool of Bethesda. And the man stands up, grabs his mat, walks away. Jesus heals the outside thing that is impossible to heal, to prove he can heal the inside thing that's invisible. He heals the visible to prove he has the power to heal the invisible problem, sin. Jesus called people to decide if they were going to come to God on man's terms, by the list, or come to God on God's terms, God's grace. Through your faith in Jesus Christ's death for you. And Jesus calls people to that same decision today. And with that, I simply want to say that then some laws were meant to be broken. Like the one Jesus was breaking, having the man break, and was breaking himself, as we're going to see next week. What laws? Our legalistic laws of religion. Those are the laws to be broken. Our laws. And the third reason that Jesus healed on the Sabbath was because it revealed who he really was. God in a human form. And it's found in the next two verses. Verse 17. But Jesus answered them, my Father is still working, and I also am working. For this reason, the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because he was not only breaking the Sabbath, if you broke that again, that crime deserved death, but he was also calling God his own Father, thereby making himself what? Equal to God. So John is saying, it was crystal clear by what Jesus said to the Jewish leaders. They got what he was saying. He was telling them, I'm God. And Jesus' defense was this. If God can work, so can I. That's a dangerous defense. And how does Jesus' defense fly? It can't unless he is God. You see, the rabbis agree that even though God rested from creation on the seventh day, God still sustained the natural processes of life, like childbirth, rainfall. And it means that the only one who was allowed to break the Sabbath was God. Now, Jesus didn't say, our Father is still working. He didn't say, your Father is still working. He said, my Father is still working. And again, his opponents didn't miss his claim right there to deity. Jesus' equality with the Heavenly Father, which is the theme of John's entire gospel. From the very beginning, the very first verse, remember, in the beginning was the Word, Jesus, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. God works on the Sabbath. Why? Because God's Sabbath rest was broken by sin. When sin entered the picture, what was God doing at the moment? Resting in a really big hammock or something. He was done. He was done with his work. Everything was perfect, right? And when everything is perfect, do you need to do anything to it? I mean, if the turkey's cooked, you don't keep cooking. What's done is done. The work is done. Adam and Eve, they were made perfect. There was no more work for God to do. But when sin entered, God went back to work. What work was that? Going after us to bring us back. I mean, why do you think we've got a Bible? It's the record of God's work. That's what your Bible is. It is the record of God's work to get us back. All the people that he's working through, all the lives he was working in to win us back to himself. To prove that he's the only real God when the world is just flooded by all the beliefs that there's other gods. and other ways. Jesus breaking the Sabbath was, of course, enough to infuriate the leaders, enough to kill them. But for Jesus to say that God was his own Father, he came from God, like he's made out of the same stuff as God. That's what he's saying. That was impossible to accept. Because another one of the laws of the religious leaders was that proclaiming to be God or equal to God was punishable by death. I want you to consider, I want to cut the Pharisees a little slack. Like this one. I'll tell you right now that God is my Father. Just like he was Jesus' Father. Well, you don't realize that, for some of you who've known me for 9 years, but I'm actually the Son of God. There's actually two of us. There's Jesus and then there's me, Scott. I'm serious. You should see the miracles I can perform. And if you're taking me seriously, you're going to think I'm crazy if you think I'm being serious. I'm just seeing if I can help you understand the reaction of the Pharisees when they see another human being, despite whatever miracle he can perform, to claim that you're the Son of God. You came directly from the way. So you can understand they're going to have some difficulty believing what Jesus said. And Jesus knows that sometimes it takes a while for people to believe it. Sometimes, miracles don't do the trick. Because a lot of people chalk that up to coincidence, luck, and karma. So Jesus just, he keeps working in your life. Doesn't he keep working in your life? And before you came to faith in him, he kept working in your life. Because it's a process to break a fallen human being from their belief system. To fully trust in the one and only God of creation. So Jesus is teaching in the midst of this healing on a Sabbath, something else, I think. And I'm going to close with this. It's that human need must always be helped. There's never a day off that we're allowed to take when it comes to helping other people in need. And the compassion of the Christian has to be like the compassion of God himself. It's unceasing. It doesn't take a day off. I mean, other work is laid aside, but not this kind of work. And I think Jesus was defining what kind of work is to be done on the Sabbath. The Pharisees were saying nothing could be done. Nothing. Don't do anything. I mean, don't do anything good. I want you to imagine all the good that has not been done Sabbath after Sabbath for centuries on the best day given to do something good. On God's mandatory day off. That when he walked the earth in a human body, he showed you how to use the mandatory day off. It's not to watch football. Though I don't think he's going to fault you for that. You're not going to lose your salvation watching a football game, on Sunday afternoon. But don't let that be the only thing that you do on a Sunday. And Sunday after Sunday, it's not just a day to do nothing. Maybe that's the day where we can catch up on all the stuff we really like to do in people's lives earlier in the week. We just couldn't find the time. Because we got to punch the clock. But then we have a day where at least, think about it. Can we do this? We've got to experiment. Do even just one thing for somebody else every Sabbath. Start today. This afternoon, think of somebody who needs something. They can really use your help. They can even just use your time. They can use a conversation. They need your attention, some encouragement. Maybe something that needs to be fixed. Maybe you have the ability to fix. But just think about it. What good thing can you do? Who do you need to meet and pray over? Who do you you know who has been suffering for a long time? Maybe they've got a physical issue, like this man who's been laying by the pool for years. That you can come alongside them and pray over them. Remind them that there is a God that answers prayers, because I'm sure that person is praying, God, I'm so lonely, I sure wish somebody would be my friend. And remember that I'm stuck in this thing. I mean, how did Jesus spend his Sabbaths? It was his MO to do good. That's it. Next week, we're going to see a little more. Message I'm going to call like father, like son. Because Jesus kind of goes into this thing about him and his daddy. And it's wonderful to see of why Jesus does what he does. Because they're interested. Who are you to do what you do and to break the law, our law? And Jesus is going to go into it and goes, listen, I only see what I see my daddy doing. And this is so exciting. What Jesus reveals. And what it means to us, the kind of relationship we should have with him. And how our eyes should be open to watching what he does. That actually we can see God working, as invisible as it is. If you watch for it, he'll clue you to where he's working. And that is his way of showing you, come here, join me. And that's what Jesus is saying. Don't you want eyes like that? Eyes to see where the Heavenly Father is working. Because if you could actually see it, wouldn't you just run to that spot? Come alongside what he's doing. Well, let's pray.